going to call this meeting to order. It is July 2nd, 2019, and it is 10 a.m., and we are in the Joe N. Idolette Junior Teacher Education Center. At this time, this is a special business meeting. At this time, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag led by Dr. Moxley.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning. All right, at this time, we're going to adopt our, Dr. Moxley, I would like you to please explain the purpose of this special meeting before we jump into this.
Thank you
The
very
orders
much,
of the day.
Mrs. Zorg. Members of the board and members of the audience and our public that is viewing this online. The purpose of our special meeting today is to review our health insurance fund, as well as we do have one consent agenda item, which are our continual personnel recommendations as we continue the hiring process throughout the summer. This meeting was scheduled and called as a result of our previous board meeting back on June the 25th, I believe it is, where we, at that meeting, we agreed to postpone this to this specially called meeting.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, board members, are there any items that you wish to move from consent to action? All right, so I need a motion.
Move that we adopt the orders of the day as written.
A second?
Mrs. Justice and then Mrs. Rosario. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, ma'am.
Mrs.
No, ma'am.
No, okay. Any further discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 5-0. Citizen input, I do not believe we have any citizen input
No.
this morning. So we're gonna move to consent agenda. I need a motion for approval.
Move approval.
Mrs. Justice, would you like to speak to
No,
your
thank you.
motion?
No.
Okay. Any other discussion? No.
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Okay, moving on to action agenda. Are there any, so there are no items that we pulled. So we're gonna move on to A, approval to increase the health insurance fund. Dr. Moxley, I'm gonna turn this over to you to please explain, your recommendation.
Yes, and this one I want to have some discussion about based upon our last workshop, and certainly I know that this is a special meeting so that you can take action, but this isn't a particular topic that we've had a lot of information and we've continued to research every single data point that has come to our attention. We have Meredy Mercado, who is our risk manager, is with us today, and Amanda Lorenz from Aon, who is the consultant company that works with our HITEF committee. And I know we've been back and forth with many data points. And so basically, to summarize this, and in the agenda, you received a chart that Meredy Mercado had put together that was a follow-up to our workshop session that had the breakdown of various percentages. And this particular item, in your packet, you had the chart that looks like this, that we had talked about, and then this particular chart was given out at the workshop. But the one that is new happens to be the chart that has the breakdown of percentages. I want to make sure each of you has that, so we'll make sure you get a copy
No,
of
I've
it.
seen it. And
Okay.
I reviewed it online when the
Yes.
documents came out. I just don't
Yes.
have it right in front of me.
Yes, and we want
I
you
have
to
seen
have
it.
that
Thank
in
you.
front of you. So, based on our discussion before, we talked about, you know, why 6.2% increase? Could it be a different percent increase? We also talked about at the workshop, what if we didn't increase it at all? I know that everybody has been really, really putting their best thinking on this, looking across. And as I have talked with our risk management department, as I have spoken with Aon, as I've looked at some of the information that Liz Cannon has provided, I have come to the conclusion that it appears like it should be a simple mathematic calculation, that you increase the amounts and you go across, and that seems pretty simplistic. I did determine that the increase to the premium doesn't mean that's the same rate of increase to different fees, like the stop loss fee, like administrative fees, like the clinic fees, all those kinds of things. I think there are some calculations and trend data that goes into what those fees end up being on a yearly basis. So we're really talking about the increase at this point in time to the fund to make sure that the fund is of such a level that it pays for the claims that will come in this year. So you saw on the chart that where we ended with current premiums and what the projected total is. And the difference is that $1.1 million figure. That represents, rounded up to a 6.2%. It's 6.18 something, but rounded up 6.2%. So when you look at that, that's what the recommendation has come from our insurance consultant and was discussed at HITEF. I'm not going to say HITEF recommended it or not. I don't know the recommendations of those minutes, but I know that that was greatly discussed and they had discussion upon that. That is based on Aon's actuarial data, taking into consideration trend data and medical trend data based on increases to medical costs moving forward for the next 12 months of our health plan period, which is, I think, October 1 to September 30th. So they have an algorithm that is very complex, very detailed, that they do their research and they pull in all of that. So it is more than just a simple mathematic calculation. And that's where I am a little nervous, quite frankly, from my insurance expertise, which is very, very small, that I rely on the expertise of Aon to give us their best estimate. And I think it's more than just a best guess. I think that they have a very detailed algorithm that they have looked at, okay, this year versus the upcoming year, what are the differences and the rate of inflation, if you will, my term, I'm sure that's not theirs, but what the increase in medical costs will be this upcoming year. And they have all that in their algorithm. That's the part that I have no ability to predict. But I do know that, like everything else, what may have cost us this procedure this year for an employee, next year another employee gets that, it may be at a higher rate just because of medical costs going up. That I don't know, but I have to rely on their algorithm and their expertise. She is here, Ms. Lorenz is here to answer any questions. But at this point in time, they are very solid, and I believe they're conservative because they don't want us to end the year in a deficit. They want us to be as close to the mark as possible. So we're using our resources to the best way we know how to use them, and we don't have money sitting here in excess. So they don't want us to be way over. But I also know that if we cut it too close and we have what is not being able to be predicted is if you have that catastrophic claim that is just below where the catastrophic picks up, that would eat up any fund balance or reserve that you have. And so for us to not do an increase at all, I think would be very, very, very risky. So I am not comfortable, in my opinion, to say, let's not increase it at all because you have, a nice safe harbor fund balance. That, I think, is I'm very comfortable with that fund balance where it is, should you have one medical claim that was unexpected. And none of us expect to have a medical claim in that magnitude, but we can't, that happens, and that's why you have insurance. So at this point in time, I think where I am comfortable is that range somewhere between that 5% and 6.2% is where I can safely tell you that we would be close to the mark. Aon really stands behind the 6.2% because they believe, and I don't want to speak for Aon, but that's what has been communicated to me, is that, and we can certainly ask her opinion to come forth, is that where they feel very conservatively that they will be on the mark. In reviewing this past year, they were really close on the mark. But again, it is an algorithm, it is a trend. I believe based on where we are with Safe Harbor, you probably can do a 5%. If that's where we decide to go after our discussion, I would be more comfortable with that than lower than that, but I think we need to be somewhere in that range.
Okay. So we can start a discussion on this. I do need a motion for approval and
I make a
then-
motion for
Second.
approval.
Okay. So we have a motion by Mrs. Rosario and a second by Dr. Schiff. So we will start the discussion with Mrs. Rosario.
Yes, ma'am. I have some questions. I'm not sure if it would be for Mary D. or for Amanda
They
Lorenz.
can,
Would I
I'm
be-
gonna
would
ask
we be
both of
able
them to
ask
come up.
Thank you.
Please state your name and your position.
Good morning, everyone. Mary D. Mercado, Coordinator of Risk Management.
Amanda Lorenz, and I'm a Health and Benefits Consulting Actuary at Aon.
Speaking to the mic, thank you.
Sorry. Amanda Lorenz, and I'm a Health and Benefits Consulting Actuary at Aon.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. So I have a few questions. I am a new board member. I was not here in previous years. So just to give me a little bit of background information, and possibly for the other new board members as well, though I don't want to speak for them, what was the recommendation in terms of what we're talking today in 2016 to 17, 17, 18, and then 18, 19?
Well, I'll just cite those by memory for you, ma'am.
I mean, I don't approximate if that. That's fine. And the reason why I asked that, while Mary D seems to be going for her notes, the reason why I asked that is I want to know, did the previous board accept recommendations for those previous years, whatever those recommendations were? And if not, what was decided for each of those years?
We've done as much research as possible. Please keep in mind that our previous superintendent with the 14-year historical perspective is no longer available to us. The Aon consultant who's had this account for a number of years is on vacation. Our program specialist who's worked for your district for 2 years is also on vacation. So we are working with limited resources. If we go back and look at the PowerPoint that was presented to the board on May 4th, 2016. I believe your question is what was their recommendation and how close was the results of that recommendation, correct?
It was, what was the recommendation, and did the board accept that recommendation?
Okay. I can't answer the second part. I'd have to defer to Ms. Nancy to do that research
Okay.
for us, again, in the absence of people that have that history.
Okay.
Based on the PowerPoint presentation, I can tell you what that number was. Un momento, por favor.
I'm confused. I am confused, Dr. Moxley. I'm confused, and Mrs. Rosario, maybe you can, I'm not sure if I'm hearing you correctly. Are you asking for what the projection was and how close the projection was? Or are you asking for what, if there was a recommendation for an increase to the premium?
No, I'll restate my question. My question was, what was the recommendation, and did the board accept it?
the recommendation for a premium increase.
For
Yes.
2016.
Okay, and may I get, may I?
What was the recommendation that came from Aon at the time? That's, or from whomever our
Okay.
insurance?
Just so I'm
Was.
clear, because I'm not sure we have you were saying that you may not have that information right with you at the moment. So I want to make sure that we have the exact question with the information. You're asking for 2016-17, what was the recommendation that came to the board?
Mm-hmm.
And what did the board approve?
Right.
And you
And-
want that for 16, 17, and 18?
16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19. Now,
Eh.
if we don't have, I understand that we
Yeah.
may not have, the people who are here now may not have been here in 16, 17, I understand, but how far back can we go with this information? I want to look at history, that's what I'm trying to
Sure.
understand.
I think that the way to do that, to make sure we have the exact correct answer, is I would need to ask Mrs. Esplin to go back into the board record.
Okay.
Because you're asking, what was the recommendation that came to the board, and what was the board's response or decision at that moment? And we can go back, a number of years
Far.
to do that.
Okay.
The 18-19 is the recommendation that is before you this morning.
Are we gonna recess?
No,
Or is it the
1920?
1920? I'm sorry.
1920.
The 1920 is before you, so,
Well, can I hear what Mary D. was going to say anyway? Mary D., what were the numbers that you were going to mention?
Well, the PowerPoint speaks to, that was the time of the deficit,
Okay.
and they're addressing the deficit, and they lay it all out, and so those numbers are all in the PowerPoint itself for that May meeting. And again, we'd have to match what the ultimate outcome was. Did I say May 26th, I think it was?
Did you have
Yeah.
a question for clarification while she's looking up that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure I understand this. I think we've been saying it, but there's two recommendations, as I understand it. There's a recommendation from Aon to HITEF, and then HITEF takes that recommendation and presents it to the board. Is that right? And so the recommendation Mrs. Rosario was asking for is the recommendation from HITEF to the board that either was recommended by Aon or not. HITEF did whatever they did, but this is HITEF's recommendation based on information from Aon to the board. Is that right? It's not Aon's recommendation to HITEF.
That is not what I'm understanding. In past practices, I know you were not here at the time, but that's okay.
sure.
So if you would like to clarify how the process normally takes place.
My understanding of what I've observed thus far is that HITEF meets, Aon is part of that, Blue Cross is part of that, Care Here is part of that. We have representatives from both CWA and IRCEA on that, and other members that are part of that committee. They talk about all of this, and they meet monthly. There is a discussion, and out of that comes a recommendation. It comes then to the superintendent through Mary as risk management. Out of that discussion that comes, and then we bring forth, the superintendent's office brings forth the information to the board. Now, is it HITEF's recommendation or Aon's recommendation? It's a result of that collaborative discussion through that committee. And HITEF is part of that, Aon is part of that committee. So it's really, Aon is they're providing the expertise and the insurance data and that kind of information for them to discuss. If I'm saying that incorrectly, I'm looking for clarification to say yay or nay, if that's not the case. But
That is correct.
that has come to the office of the superintendent, whomever is sitting in the seat, and then that comes to the board.
Okay, please.
Okay.
That's helpful, thank you.
I
What
think,
were you going, I'm still trying to get you to answer.
okay.
What information do you have there for us?
Just referencing the PowerPoint at that time, ma'am, that's all.
At the time of
The May 26th meeting,
Of
which speaks to,
this year,
of the
of
16th,
2016?
for the 17-18 year, to answer
I
your
don't
first
have that in
question.
front of me, so can you read that, please?
I'm sorry. I really feel that we would have had all this information ahead of time in our questions so that our staff would have been prepared. At this time, it's 10:20. We're going to take a 10-minute recess so that staff can
Pull together some
pull
information.
together information, and so I'm going to take a 10-minute recess, okay?
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna call this special meeting back to order at 10:40. We took a brief recess so that we could gather some more information. At this time, we have a motion by Mrs. Rosario and a second by Dr. Schiff, and we are in discussion for action item A, approval to increase the health insurance fund. And we did take a brief break to get the historic data that was requested by a board member. And at this time, I would like Dr. Moxley to please review those numbers.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Zork. Board members, Mrs. Esplin gave you a copy of a memo dated November 4th, 2016, which basically shows that in 2016, there was a recommended increase of 32% over current rates. That indeed actually was implemented, okay? 17, there was no increase in premium. The report that was given to the board at the time on March 28th, 2017, the difference was a 0.3%, so it was minimal, and no increase was recommended, or obviously there was nothing to take action on. In 18, there was no increase that was recommended or anything that would have action to be taken upon. So you can see that over the past 3 years, there was a major increase in 16, no increase in 17, no increase in 18, and you are here what's before you for 2019 is the information that is in your board packet with the recommendation of 6.2%. And obviously, the discussion will result in where we end up with what the actual percent increase is.
Is it related to this?
It's-
Okay,
It is.
okay, go ahead.
Dr. Moxley, I have a question for the Aon consultant,
Sure.
Amanda Lorenz, if she could come to the
Yes.
podium, please. Thank you very much.
Since if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm
let's go.
sorry. Yeah, I
No,
thought-
and,
okay.
and because of the break, it did, we got out of order. We had a motion by Mrs. Rosario, who spoke to her motion. Then we have Dr. Schiff, who had a second. So before we engage, I want to offer them the opportunity if they had questions, and then I'll come to you following, okay?
Okay.
I do, I have a follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair, I appreciate that. I thank you, Dr. Moxley, Madam Chair, for taking that break. I did not ask this question before because, as many of you know, naturally, organically, as you discuss in meetings, you don't know if you're going to have a question until you have that question. Either way, I still appreciate that you took that time. This gives me a little bit of perspective, which is the information that were not given before. We were given historical data on different other areas, but not particularly with relation to this. So I understand how we've actually come full circle. Now I understand where the 6.2% comes in relation to the previous years. So I yield. I don't have any more questions at this time. Thank you.
This is not so much a question, this is in the context of our discussion, and for the second. And here's where, I have said this a number of times before, so this won't be the first time you hear it. But here's where I continue to struggle on this. Context. Context is everything, right? This doesn't happen in a vacuum, and so whatever is Aon's recommendation, and whatever are their predictions, don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the context of how we've wound up where we are right now. And that's where I continue to struggle with this. And I've said it before, and I'm saying it now because we're in the business meeting and for the record. It may have been on record before, but this recommendation for the 6.2 increase, I'm not suggesting that that there's anything wrong with the projection. What I am concerned about is that there were previous agreements, and Aon's recommendation is strictly about their job, which is to predict where we're going to be and what are the projections for the next year. I get that. But that's also comes alongside, and as I understand it, and again, if I'm wrong in my understanding, part of the issue is that because where we ultimately get the money from that we need comes from the Safe Harbor Fund. And if our Safe Harbor Fund dips below what we need, that's when we get in trouble, correct? I get that our Safe Harbor Fund and the amount that health insurance is increasing are two different things. But the reason, as I understand it, the premiums have to increase is because we have to be clear that we're going to be able to cover our expenses. And so there was a commitment by the previous board to put into the Safe Harbor Fund. The Safe Harbor Fund grew faster than we expected. The board decided not to make that commitment, and now, based on projections, I'm not saying they're wrong, we're looking at an increase. But there's a set of circumstances that happen around this that aren't just about this individual increase. It's the context in which that occurs. And that's where I continue to struggle with this. Because, that $1.5 million that we didn't do, that continues to come up, the increase that employees had, because, again, I have no idea if it was you or if it was Aon or who was making recommendations over all those years that there were not increases, which were then, I don't know who it was, I don't know the process of that, but which were then shouldered by employees. To, a heavy burden. So all of those things happened. And I'm not saying that the projections are wrong, and I'm not saying that health insurance isn't going up. I am saying there's a context in which this happens and the degree to which we continue to ask employees to shoulder more and more of this piece that we made commitments about too, and we made errors about, frankly, in the past too. So that's where I'm gonna continue, so just where I'm coming from in this, and I know that I may be further back along the line than some of my fellow board members in how I feel about this. But I'm really, I'm grateful for this chart that says, what it looks like if we back it up. But this decision doesn't just happen because there's this 6.2%. There's a lot else that goes into the decision.
Can I speak to that?
I don't know that I said that very well, but.
So,
Yes, go ahead.
no, I think you articulated it fine. I understand what you're saying, and because there was a negative trend in claims, the Safe Harbor grew faster than what had originally been projected, and that was something that was really unforeseen, and really, when I've spoken with Aon and the actuary, that not something that we will ever expect to see again. In fact, they have predicted a correction of that negative trend. So as a board member, it's our responsibility to, make sure that we manage the fund and raise premiums so that we don't get into the situation where we had to raise it 32%. But you're not wrong that the board had said that they would make contributions to the fund to bring it back into a healthy place, and the Safe Harbor grew faster because of a negative trend, and so we didn't make that transfer. Now, we can make the transfer now. If you want to take $1.5 million or 1.1, if you want to make a transfer and cover this now as a board, we can do that. And it will cover the 6% for this year. But next year, the claims are going to continue to increase. And next year, we'll probably have a premium increase of maybe 10% or 12%, because it's a we'll cover it. But and there's a chance maybe we wouldn't, because that's the way this works. We're trying to predict the future. So, but I'm just saying, eventually premiums are going to have to go up, because that is just the nature of healthcare in general. So I think we had gotten to a place in this district where premiums weren't being raised at all, and it put us into a very bad place. It put us into a bad place with a $7 million deficit. As a new board member, it was a very difficult thing to do, to be at an impasse hearing and to have to make a decision about raising health insurance premiums 32%. I had to drive through Carline and look at teachers, my kids' teachers, and speak to them and know that I had just done that. Very hard as a person, just so that we're clear, Liz. So it's this delicate balance, right? We can make the transfer. If you want to park $1 million in there, we can do that. As I said to you, we have the power to make any decision, including a good one and a bad one. If that's the best use of $1 million right now, rather than doing something else with it, different things we can do with money, right? We talked about a lot of stuff when we did our projections. What do we want to do? Do we want to do a budget, do we want guidance counselors? Do we want to do new STEAM programs? Do we want to give raises? This is something that we could do with money. Am I correct in that, Dr. Moxley?
You have the choice to direct your money in your budget.
Can you had mentioned a few things on historical perspective, and I think this is definitely something that we're gonna have to make sure that we bring in Amanda Cross and have that historical perspective and get the dates of those workshops so that the board members, Mrs. Justice was here at the time, but so that you have that historical perspective. It was May 5th, 2015 here. I have a memo I've been keeping track of over the past few years, recommendations. Historically, before even our past superintendent, it was politically unpopular to raise premiums. And that's how we got into the situation, or that's how the board got in the situation 2016 when it was brought to them that the fund balance was as low as it was, because at the time, my understanding, the superintendent and staff, and also we had a different broker. It was not Aon, and we switched brokers for this. So they did not bring it to the board, and it was a recommendation for basically no increase, my understanding. Okay, do you want to add some historical value here? I would have. And so there is a period that they had, go ahead, Liz.
Liz
I appreciate
Cannon,
it.
president of IRCEA and also a member of the HITEF committee.
Okay.
In 2015, there was a 3% increase on the health insurance premiums. According to the 10-1208 filing, which is a filing done by the healthcare consultants based upon our self-funded form, there was a recommendation of 10%. So yes, you are right that there was a recommendation that was not brought to HITEF nor the board. There's also, in 2014-15, we had an unprecedented number of high claims, resulting in approximately 2.9, I'm remembering this off the top, 2.9 million, which only resulted in about approximately $419,000 in stop-loss recovery fees. So those are two, but 14-15, there was an increase as well, and there was also an increase in 12-13. The 12-13 increase was delayed based upon negotiations, which took a year and a half before that was. But there were increases to insurance over the course of those years.
But I think the increases that were being made, like the 14% was a recommendation, but at the time, the board only took the 3% increase, correct?
It was a 10% according to, and generally speaking, I also will say, if you look at the 10-12 filings, 10-12 filings are done far in advance. They're predictions for 3 years. So generally, those are your most conservative findings. The 10% was recommended on the 10-12 filings for that 15-16 year, but 3% was the applied increase. So yes, you are correct. There were increases. It was not
Okay.
based upon no increases.
Right, okay. So let me step back here then. Liz, you can, if you don't mind, just stay up here, so.
Please.
Because we appreciate you being here. So for clarification here, there were slight increases, but the recommendations were not taken. And sometimes the information wasn't even given to HITEF, as we're hearing, and/or the board, which we weren't, here at the time. But now we have a new broker who is making these recommendations. It was not handled as professionally as it is currently with Aon. So I do want to clarify that. Mrs. Justice?
Yeah, I just want to make a point. I mean, I think Liz kind of made the point for us in some ways, as far as a recommendation being made and not taken or not brought, and then a lower increase being done, and then it not being enough to cover what eventually became a big problem with a health insurance fund over a course of not that long of a time when you think about a $7 million deficit. So you said in 14-15 there were a large number of claims. And so that can happen again. And one of the things that I think about, and I've researched a little bit about what those claims can be, premature births are something that can be a very large claim. We have a retiring workforce. Our workforce is aging in Indian River County, and we're hiring younger teachers or new teachers coming in who may be having babies. And that is something when an actuary is looking at the age of your workforce and some of those things, that would come into play. So as a board member, I don't know how, I'm not an actuary, but I have to understand that it's not just a simple calculation. There are a lot of different factors that come into play. So for me, when I look at a recommendation and then think like, well, let's just pick another number, I feel like they did that before. And history repeats itself. They did that before, and look what happened.
Did Mrs. Berenborg, we've not heard from you. Would you like to weigh in on this conversation?
Yes, I would like to say thank you to Nancy for putting the agenda out on Friday. So on Friday, and over the weekend, I started looking into information, doing some research. Spoke with Dr. Moxley on Monday, asked my questions on Monday that I needed to ask. And of course, there are questions that you all have that I didn't know to ask, so I appreciate that. It's complex. The history has caused pain. And I think we don't want to cause pain. Nobody here wants to do that. But we also need to look into our crystal ball and figure out, are we going to cause more pain in the future? It's easy for us to do that and then say, you know what, that's going to be somebody else's problem later on. And we can't do that. We got to take care of it. That's why I asked, is there somewhere in the middle that we can fall? And Dr. Moxley and I talked about where in the middle we could fall without taking a huge risk. And I'm comfortable with that number that we talked about.
Can you clarify what that number was?
Sure. I was looking at 3%, 4.6%, those two, and we talked about why that 5% probably needs to be the magic number. And after going through everything, and again, moving money to cover some stuff, I'm not quite sure if that will factor into this, what decision we're making today, or do we need to make that decision together? At the same time, moving money or doing this. But the money needs to be there. The money needs to be there. We can't take that risk without putting some money there.
Okay, we're gonna, Dr. Schiff, then Mrs. Rosario.
I think it's really important that the board honor its commitments. Like you said, the point is not that I want to pass this off to another board. I honestly, at this moment, other than the next 3.5 years, I have no idea how long I'm going to be here, right? Neither do any of us. It is important, though, that the board be a body that people feel they can have some faith in and some trust in. I'm now sitting on a board responsible for a decision that was made and then unmade by a previous board. And I know I keep coming back to this, but it is germane to this conversation because it's a significant amount of money, and it's money that would have gone into the Safe Harbor Fund. And while we're talking about different ways that we get to the Safe Harbor Fund and insurance raising and claims against it and all of those things, it is the pot of money that ultimately we're discussing, as I understand it. So I too have, I mean, we all look at this. We all look at it as soon as it comes out on Friday. We all think about it, and we all get here and have a conversation. Just to put it out there where I think I'm landing on this, but this is where I am at this moment. And because we, as a board, cannot have brainstorming conversations where we get to, hash things around, it's always a danger when sitting on the dais to throw out a brainstorming idea. But this is where I think I'm landing at the moment. I can recognize the need for some raise, But it really matters to me that we honor commitments if we make them. Whether I made them or where I'm not, as the body corporate, it matters to me. That said, where I think I'm landing at the moment is that we make good on the promise of the 1.5, whatever it was, and a 3% raise. That, to me, feels like we are honoring the fact that they're going up, we're putting money into it, we are making good on our commitment, we're putting money into the Safe Harbor Fund. We have no idea if it's gonna be a catastrophic year or a, look, we did better than expected year, right? That happens, and we can't predict that. But at the moment, I think that's where I'm sitting, but you know, give me a good argument if that's not a good place to be.
Madam Chair.
Oh,
Mrs. Rosario.
The other day when we were talking about this, I recommended literally that halfway point, that 3.1. I believe it was Mrs. Barenborg who mentioned either 5 or 4.6, somewhere in between the 6.2 and the 3.1. So I until Dr. Schiff just spoke, I was still between 3.1 and the 4.6. However, I have a question for Dr. Schiff. You just said that we should honor 1.5 as a board and raise 3%.
now, but I
Now-
have to say, sorry, I
Did
don't
I-
know the numbers associated with
Right,
that.
but am I understanding that you're suggesting, just for clarification, that the board contribution should be 1.5 and that we raise 3% so therefore the total is 4.5%?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
1.5 million that we
May
agreed
I
to, not
please-
1.5%.
may I please remind-
No, 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 that
I
wasn't
need to
a-
stop
hold on,
right here
hold
for just a minute. We are only talking about today what we're doing with the insurance fund.
Right.
Not contributions, and
Right, that's
which
what
group
I-
No, I
pays
wasn't
what.
talking about-
Only what you want to do with the insurance
That's what I
fund.
want, that's what I wanted to clarify. Okay. So just for the record then, I'm still between 3.1 and 4.6 for the board.
Yeah, okay. So I get what you're saying, I hear you, and I understand in your heart that you feel like the board had made a commitment to do this. The board made the commitment because the board had that plan set out, because that was what we were told we were going to need to do to replenish the Safe Harbor Fund. So while it was what the plan was, the plan changed because the claims changed and we didn't have to put it in. I'm not saying that we didn't say that we would plan to do it, but it was a business decision. There are things that you can run a school district like a business and sometimes you can't. I don't know if the Blueberry story, some decisions are not business decisions. Some decisions are business decisions. For me, as a business person, if I'm looking at our cash flow, I want to use that $1 million, or the $1.5 million, for STEAM initiatives, for guidance counselors in our elementary schools, for, we heard we needed custodians, right? So when I'm thinking about all of the different things that we could do with that money, to put it somewhere because we said we were going to, what we did, is that the best use of that money right now to serve students? And I've said it before, I will say it again, we don't get money to save money, we get money to spend it well. And so while I understand and hear you, and I agree with you in some ways that the commitment was made, and I don't like the fact that employees feel that somehow we reneged on something. I feel like as a board, we have to make the best decisions with the funds, and I just don't feel that that's the best use of those funds right now.
So if I can respond.
Mrs. Barenborg after you.
So this may be one of these areas where we may agree to disagree, right? And that's the point of a board, and that's why there's 5 people on a board and not just one making the decisions. That actually is democracy. So we may not agree on this. I don't disagree with you that funds can only be used once, and where and how we use them matters. One of the challenges has been, we haven't had financial data for a really long time. So we have continued to have to make decisions or not make decisions because we haven't had the information. Thankfully now, thank you, Dr. Moxley, we're getting that information in a clearer way than we've had it for at least as long as I've been on the board. So right now, when I make decisions about where to spend this dollar or that dollar, the history on which I do that, in conjunction with legislative decisions that have only recently been made and what we're getting and where we have funds and categorical funds that are rolling over and where we can move them into general, we're just now getting that information, right? So I'm not yet convinced, while I don't disagree with you that, you know, do I want to put it in more custodians? Do I want to put it in, do I want to do, of course I do, I want to do everything. But this decision was also made based on what at the time was a deficit in the safe harbor. We no longer have a deficit in the safe harbor, but as we've heard, we may move towards one. We may have a great year and wind up with more money. We may have a terrible year and wind up with less. We don't know.
Even with a premium increase, that could happen.
Correct. We don't know. What we do know is our own integrity. I mean, and sorry to put it in that, but what we do know is our values and our integrity. And I don't, I get it. As a business decision, things shift, and we have to look at the best use of the money. But because we're looking at raise, you know, premium raise on top of premium raise on top of premium raise, as Mrs. Cannon just, you know, this is not like we're just kind of making it up. And it's not like we haven't, we haven't done raises. I want to make that decision in a way that honors the people who are going to have to pay this.
And I just want to speak to that, because you said it's about integrity. I think I'm a person.
I'm not suggesting you're not.
And I don't
I'm
think
not
you are, so I
suggesting
want to
you're
be clear about my thinking about it. When that decision was made, when that plan was formulated, it was formulated, again, kind of trying to look at a crystal ball. What are we going to have to do to replenish the fund? And there was a plan that was made, and things changed about the way that the claim, again, there's a negative trend in claims that was unpredicted and really I mean, Amanda Lorenz could speak, perhaps she could speak about that for a moment if you could, about the negative trending claims, how common that is, and if that's something that you would expect, that anyone expected to have happen or we would expect to see again, because then, so that changed, and then the plan should change. I mean, if you're doing something and it's not working or it doesn't need to happen, then you change your plan. I mean, that's what you do, you adapt. So, you know, not everything, so I don't, when I say I don't want to make the transfer because I don't feel that's the best use of the funds, I don't feel it's an issue of integrity for me because I don't feel I'm breaking a promise. I actually feel like I'm doing what my job is to do, which is to make sometimes really hard decisions about money and what's best for
Yeah,
kids
and
and
to clarify,
teachers.
yeah,
And-
I don't-
And on one person.
Yeah, I don't mean to impugn the integrity of anybody on the board.
Well, we were here, I mean, you know, so.
Yeah, and I don't mean to impugn that, and I know you have to make hard decisions. I'm also clear that my job here, the only place I can really stand in is my values and my integrity, right? Because I can't predict the future, and, you know, one way or another, you know, I or we as a board may take heat, you know, in a variety of places. We have to live with that. That's the nature of the job. You know, but we got to go with what we feel is right, and we may differ on those. And that's why we're a board, frankly. So, anyway.
So I hear what both of you are saying. I agree that we need to be faithful in some respects to what was done in the past. And yet, we do need to make those tough decisions, and we do need to put money where it's going to be productive for students. I also know that we're in a serious crisis in not only here, but our state about teachers and taking care of teachers. And I think as a teacher, you want to be taken care of. You want to be proud of where you work. You want to be thought of as the people are going to be, they're going to say what they're going to do. Can we come to the middle on some of this? Is there a way that we can go, okay, let's look at maybe 4.6% or the 3.2% or 3.1%, but maybe the 4.6% is probably a better number, and take some of that money, put it in, and then we look at next year and we say, hey, we had a great year, we had a horrible year, we're in this situation again, what do we want to do now? I just think trying to solve it all in 1 year is also hard. I know it didn't happen over 1 year. If you look at the trend, it happened over several years. It didn't just bang happen in 1 year. So if we can maybe help this year a little bit, help a little bit next year, if we're in that position to do so. Again, we don't have that crystal ball, we don't know, but I also think if we take all that money and throw it in there, we're not gonna be able to do some things we need to do for kids. So I think that there might be a position that we can take that's somewhere in the middle. And Mrs. Zork, we haven't heard from you, so I'd really like to hear from you.
If I may,
Go ahead.
let me just serve a quick reminder that the purpose of your reserve fund is reserves required by the state. So we don't want to tap into those reserve
No,
funds.
that's not what I'm asking.
Okay. We want to really kind of separate, they're inclusive, they're correlated issues, but yet they're separate. If we did categorical funding, they would be two different line items. One would be the reserve funds, and one would be your claim expenditures.
That's not what I'm referring to.
Okay, I just want to
No.
clarify, thank you.
Okay. So, no, I'm listening to everyone's input here. Because I was here at a time, I come on the board at the time that it was the time of the deficit and the fund balance. No, I don't really see it not being us not increasing anything. I do hear about the commitment, and I don't believe we're not even allowed to talk about that right now, are we? For legal standpoint or negotiation standpoint?
Right, that's something that's gonna be considered in the future. I would advise the board just to stick with the question that's on
Okay.
the table. Not that
Okay.
you necessarily have to forget everything
Right,
else, so that you're
right.
able to do that, but sticking with the issue as presented with the, chart that's been laid out, that is really what we should talk about here. And you all can keep in mind other things that are going
Right.
on, but really this discussion really needs to be limited to this item.
So I do have a lot of thoughts about that, that commitment. I don't think that we should not take the advice of Aon or actuary on some increase and, like you said, come somewhere in the middle on this. So I am also leaning toward the 4.6, but that is where I'm leaning at this time.
Mrs. Zork, I have a question.
Go ahead.
We haven't heard from Aon about, we've discussed perhaps doing a different percentage increase, but we have had zero recommendation about a different increase. No, these are numbers as to what they would be if we did a different increase, but we haven't actually heard from Amanda Lorenz about what her opinion would be as an actuary of not doing the 6.2, because right now, as I understand it, Aon's recommendation is still 6.2. Am I correct in thinking that?
That is the information that has been given to us.
Okay.
And I certainly would like Ms. Lorenz to clarify for us, if that's permissible, Mrs. Zork.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So to clarify, I would say that the 6.2% is really kind of separate from meeting the safe harbor requirements, and it's really about covering your expenses for the next year. And you can implement an increase that's lower and potentially, spend down some of the fund, and that might be okay. It all depends on the tolerance or the risk tolerance for how close you want to get to the safe harbor level.
Do you have a prediction as to does Aon have a position as to what percentage they would be comfortable with over the next year based on projections that we would be able to safely adopt a premium increase of X, knowing that based on projections, we would draw the fund balance down by Y and that we would still be in a safe range?
So there's no necessarily right answer for all clients. It really just depends on your own risk tolerance and how much of a buffer you would like to keep, or how much money you have available in general funds to transfer in case you need it to meet the safe harbor.
So, Dr. Moxley, Mrs. Zork, I have one more question. Dr. Moxley, when you're working within the school district, who would be the person that you would be relying on to help you to know how to decide about that risk? Who would you work with?
We would work with our Coordinator of Risk Management, Meredy Mercado, and our Chief Financial Officer, Ronald Fagan. We do get monthly statements as to the claims that have been paid and where we are with regards to whether we're on point, meaning we have had less or more than what was anticipated. Again, you have to keep in mind that when you look at it annually, you may have one month that was higher than anticipated, and the next month it's lower than anticipated, and it averages out to where you're on point. But we do monitor that monthly. That does run through our risk management department, which reports to the CFO.
So my next question would be, Mrs. Zork, if I may, could Mrs. Mercado come up to the podium? Because my question to her would then be, do you have, as our Coordinator of Risk Management, an opinion regarding what premium you would be comfortable with us adopting, what increase you would be comfortable with that would allow us to, am I allowed to ask, may I
No,
ask?
yes, I'm sorry.
Aon's
that's
brought
my-
6.2. We have money over and above what is required for us to have in the safe harbor right now currently, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to what percentage you would be comfortable with us adopting, premium increase? You would be comfortable with us adopting that would allow us to spend down some of that extra fund in the safe harbor to get us not to a place where where you would feel that our risk was out of something that you would recommend, but that would be something that you would be comfortable with? Do you have an opinion on that?
I do, thank you for asking. 2 clarifications. We're not talking premiums, we're talking funding the health insurance fund. Thank you. And then second to that, I truly defer to the experts. That's why they're the experts. That's why we're paying. I come from a legal background, and that's what you pay attorneys for their opinion for. It's sometimes the client takes that advice and sometimes they don't, right? Same thing here with the professionals that we're paying for to give us this opinion. I think the 6.2 is a conservative number. As a risk manager, I'm always going to value that a little higher because I do need that buffer, just like in the insurance world. Nobody likes to pay insurance premiums, but we pay them to give us safe harbor. Having said that, I stand on the 6.2.
Mrs. Barrenborg? and
Yeah.
then-
Dr. Moxley, did you want to say something
I
before?
will after you.
Okay. I was looking back at this history, and if you look, you were telling us that it was, in 15, it was 3% was recommended, correct?
10% was recommended.
Or, I'm sorry, 10% was recommended, but they only took 3. Okay, so they decided not to listen to what was suggested. And then the following year, in 2016, is when they had to raise it 32%.
The 10% wasn't, actually, I don't have any record that that was what Brown & Brown recommended to HITEF nor to the superintendent. That is a number off of a insurance filing, the 101208, which they project each year, for 3 years. So generally speaking, that's going to be a little bit higher than what their actual recommendation. For instance, on last year's, the most recent 101208, it had 0% increase last year, 0% this year, and 6% for next year. So that 10% comes from a filing of a future prediction.
Okay, but that number it was 10%, but they only increased it 3%.
Correct,
Okay, and then the following year, they had to increase it 32%
correct.
because of unforeseen situation.
Because at the start of 17, 18, if I'm not mistaken, or at the start of 15, 16, we were going into with a balance of around 92,000 as opposed to the 2.9 million
So they
Okay.
didn't have a healthy
Recommended.
fund
They didn't
balance
have
to
a
begin
healthy
with.
fund balance.
Correct.
Okay,
But we have a healthy fund balance.
Correct.
Somewhat now.
okay. Thank you. Dr. Moxley?
Yes, board members, I know this is a really tough decision, and we certainly don't want to over-increase. And you want to keep a safe harbor, but you want to also not be right at that exact point in case there's an emergency. What I would say to you, yes, my recommendation was in honoring the actuarials from the experts, and that's why you have that. And I know that's the motion on the floor. However, if the board is not comfortable with that and you decide, I've heard the 4.6, I've heard the 3.1 number, I will tell you as the superintendent, the last thing I want to have under my watch is where all of a sudden we have a major deficit again, and you are now faced with solving a problem in that capacity. If you are not comfortable with the conservative 6.2 and you choose to go with a 4.6 or a 3.1, I do want you to know that in the budgeting process, I will be bringing back to you a budget that includes a higher fund balance of the difference in the percentage, because I am not comfortable that if there were to be something that dipped that we couldn't plan, I want to be able to say to you, okay, while we may have missed the mark, we now, out of the operating budget, have to provide for that and cover that. I do not want to be in the position where I have to go in and cut a program or cut a position or something that is needed. I will plan for that in the fund balance and target that for that amount of money. But that would be how, as a superintendent, I would manage our fiscal responsibility. Right or wrong, I just believe that we need to plan for that.
So just to be clear, when we go through any of the decision-making for the budget this year, there will be a portion of our general fund balance earmarked to be able to cover any deficit, between whatever percentage we agree with and whatever the difference is between where we are, whether it's 869 and 1.1 or 375 and 1 point, whatever, you're going to earmark that, and that will be that you would consider those to be somewhat categorical funds in case you need them for this.
I would certainly want to talk with our CFO about how to do that. In my mind, the only place you have to go is into your fund balance for unexpected things. You have a board policy that requires a 5% fund balance. In my simple calculation, I would think that, however we do it, but at the minimum, that 5% fund balance should be 5% plus whatever the difference is here, with you being fully aware that that's why it's 5.2% or whatever it ends up being.
I think that's a great way to look at this and address that, and I thank you for bringing that, because I think what that does is, we then, knowing that, and that was well put, thank you, we can then settle on a percentage, knowing how, if there's a difference, where there may be some resources that we put aside for that, and that brings us back to, so what is the percentage we're now comfortable with? And we could move forward with that decision, and then hopefully, land on a number, vote, and move on.
But just know that those earmarked funds will be earmarked.
Correct.
So that means that they won't be for custodians or for STEAM, we've talked about rolling the teachers back into the budget, the specialist teachers. So just know, I mean, what we discussed doesn't go away. It's this constant balance.
Right, but what it does, in the same way, these are not legally restricted funds in the way some of our categorical funds are. This is a recommendation by the superintendent saying, I will set this aside. I'm going to check on how we do that. I'm going to check both, legally and from accounting, how we make that happen. If, because we can't predict the future, it turns out we're having a great year. We're ahead of the game, as we are this year. There's nothing that says those funds can't be moved back into some other place, one. Two, I'm not yet clear that that whatever amount that may turn out to be necessarily means we can't put the teachers on restricted funds back into the general fund, or can't do the custodians, or whatever that is, because we haven't had that conversation, and we don't know what those numbers are. So I don't want to go forward saying, well, if we do this, we can't do that. We don't know that right now.
The only risk I see with that, because, and I'm just looking at perception. Perception is, we've set that aside for possible health
Mm-hmm.
health insurance or health coverage to the fund. And if we were to move those and use them for something else, say custodians, and then a few months later, we had a spike where we needed to,
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I'm seeing,
That's not what I'm
so what are
saying.
you saying?
So what I'm saying is that we right now, we don't know if we're gonna have a banner year or or we're gonna have unprecedented high claims. We have no idea how that's gonna go, right? We can't predict that. It may turn out that we get halfway through the year and it turns out we're having a good year again. Claims are lower than expected. Our safe harbor fund is rising in a way, or is retaining more than we anticipated. At that point, we get to make a decision. I'm not saying we're making that decision on the front end, I'm saying we're making it on the back end.
So, I know these are predictions, but also we do know that the cost historically is gonna increase for services, is that correct, Amanda? So we're not only looking at claims of what we don't know that we're gonna get, we know the services are gonna increase, prescriptions are gonna increase, by, is it 6%? Is what I've read, that it's historical 6% for those type of increase every year.
That's roughly close to what our projections are currently.
Okay, okay. I have a question for Mrs. Barrenborg. With the 4.6, I know we had talked about that in the workshop. What is your thinking on that number? What, how'd you come to that?
Oh, I'm leaning back and forth between the 5.0 and the 4.6, and I'll tell you why.
Right,
I'm very conservative in that I don't want to have what happened before
Right.
repeat itself. So that's why I'm leaning towards the 5.0. The teacher in me feels for what's going on and says, we need to, lighten the load a little bit. That's a different discussion. So, being careful in how I speak about this, I am wavering between those two numbers because I don't think we can go any lower than 4.6. We're going to be in trouble. I think we need to look at 5.0. That's Dr. Moxley and I talked about that number. That number looks like, okay, like I said, a little chip away, and let's help. But I'm afraid that if we don't, I don't want to be in the situation with that 32%. I don't want to go through what you guys went through. I don't. I think it's not fair to the employees that are sitting there that year when it could have been done over the years. It's easier to take a really big hit in increments and payments than it is to take one big hit at once. Think about your own personal, hold on one second. Think about your own personal finances. If you take a huge hit in one year, now you gotta make decisions in your life. And that's where we are. We're making decisions in our budget. What are we gonna not do that we wanted to do? And trying to squeeze it lightly is a little bit easier, I think. It's still gonna happen. It's still a problem. So that's why I'm going back and forth between that 5.0 and that 4.6.
right.
Now leaning a little bit more, unfortunately, to the 5.0 because of that.
Right. And the further the conversation's going, and I'm looking at reading more of the memos and notes from 2014, 15, because the recommendations weren't made, that's how I feel that a lot of those mistakes got to where it was. And I know when we brought Dr. Moxley on, we brought her on trusting her as an experienced superintendent. And I'm looking at, yes, I want to lean to 4.6 because nobody likes to raise these premium or raise this for the cost. But I'm listening to our actuary, I'm listening to Dr. Moxley's research, and I don't want to get it back into that situation again either.
a suggestion.
And this doesn't have anything at this conversation at the time has nothing to do with that prior commitment. That
That's
is
not what I'm talking
something,
about. That's not
that
what
is
I said.
something that, you know, as a board, we can bring back at another date.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'd like to suggest, we have a motion on the table. I'd like to suggest that we either vote on that motion or we amend that motion, because I think we've now had pretty much the discussion. We're wavering between a couple of numbers. In order to vote on those numbers, we have to have a motion about them, and I'd like to suggest, is it time that we could move towards amending the motion and
I'm fine
moving
with
towards
that.
vote?
I'm good with it.
If I may, you can do it either way. You can vote on the original motion, or you can vote to amend, and then you'll have to vote on the original motion. Sorry, let me clarify. You can vote on the motion on the table, and if it's to deny, then you can make a new motion to the discussed upon number, or you can amend the current motion on the floor. You'll still need 2 votes either way.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend the original motion of 6.2% increase to a 4.6% increase. Did I say that right? Did I say that legally correct?
That's correct.
That's my motion.
Okay. Since I have a motion, I would have to have a second for the amendment.
I'll second.
Okay. Do we want to just see where we are as a board on the 4.6 and vote on this, or did we want further discussion on this?
No, I don't have any further discussion.
Okay. What about the other board members? Okay. So we have an approval to increase the health insurance fund. We have an amendment for 4.6 by Mrs. Rosario and a second by Dr. Schiff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yes.
Yes.
So, okay. So the motion fails.
So the original motion's still on the floor for 6.2%.
So I need a motion, for, do we want to vote on the 6.2, or do we have a motion for 5.0, or the other recommendation, 3.1?
It's her motion, correct?
For an amendment?
Yeah,
It
so,
failed, so you
Do
so
we have
you
a
said we
motion?
still have one on the floor, though.
Yes, but
The
we can
motion on the
amend.
floor is for
Okay. So I'll
6.2.
offer to amend that motion to 5.0.
Okay, 5.0. I need a second. Can I second?
The chair's allowed to second, you just can't make them.
Yes.
Okay, I'll second. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Having wanted to come somewhere in the middle, I think this is as far in the middle as we can go without getting in trouble. Having talked to Dr. Moxley, who I trust has gone through similar situations, and listening to what everyone's saying, the input, it's a tough decision. Yes, I want to go further down, but I also know I don't want to get into that same trouble we've had in the past. And I think there are other things that we can do that we can't talk about now. So having known that, I feel like a 5.0 is something I can live with, that it's not taking as big a risk as that it's not taking as big a risk as that 4.6, but yet, since our safe harbor is up, I think that I can live with that 5.0.
Okay, so since I have a second on that, I feel like the 6.2 is a very conservative number, and yes, we want to lean toward conservative when we're dealing with risk. But, and through the research and looking at this and taking everything in consideration, I would like to go to 4.6, but I don't feel like we should take that much risk. And also, I'm taking advice from Dr. Moxley on 6.2 you feel is extremely conservative, and we like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but 5% is, can you explain how you
Well,
come up with the
I,
5%?
well, we just, from the discussion from the workshop and really looked at that, I am comfortable with 5%, if that's where the board goes. I believe we still need to make sure that we're monitoring every, you know, you're taking a little bit more risk, but you're being still pretty conservative in that respect, so.
Okay. Any other discussion? Go ahead.
Obviously, I just made a motion for the 4.6, and I appreciate the vote. I certainly am not in favor of the 6.2, so I will support the 5.0 just to avoid the 6.2. So I just wanted to make mention there.
Would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'm not going to be supporting the 5.0. I want to know, honestly, I feel like we are above in our safe harbor. I'd like to know what the percentage is that, as a projection, we could spend down some of that and still have a percentage. So me saying 5.0 right now, I mean, I don't want it, if we're going to take the actuary's advice, we take the actuary's advice. The actuary says 6.2. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I think there probably is a number, and that there could be some projection as to where we would be bringing down the safe harbor into a place where we were comfortable. And so while I respect my fellow board members and I respect the 5, and I think it's a smart conservative decision, I don't know that it's a decision that I'm going to be able to support today, because I don't know that it's the best, most informed decision today, to be honest with you.
Would you like to speak? No? Are we ready to vote?
I think I've spoken.
Okay. Okay, so all in favor to approve the increase to the health insurance fund as amended for 5.0, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-2. Mrs. Barrenborg, Mrs. Rosario, myself, and then opposed, Dr. Schiff and Mrs. Justice. Okay.
And we just need to vote on the original motion.
Okay.
So that was, the motion was made by
That was, that,
Rosario and Shift, and that was for the 6.2, because we voted to amend, so we need to vote on the original motion, so the amendment can be effective, because that wasn't voted on yet.
The 4.6 wasn't voted on?
It was
The 6.2 wasn't voted on.
6.2.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay, the approval to increase the health insurance fund, 6.2, Mrs. Rosario had a motion, Dr. Schiff had a second. All in favor of the increase of 6.2?
No.
No?
No.
No.
Okay. So I know I did that backwards, but I already. 5 opposed. Okay, so we're gonna move on to superintendent report, Dr. Moxley.
Yes, board members, I don't have anything to present today. I know we've had some long discussion. This was a tough discussion measure, and we will continue to work on this and monitor it every month and make sure you are well informed along the way.
All right, let's see, we do not, no board discussion, school board member matters. Do we have, board members?
I have one item.
Start.
Yeah, I attended Indian River County Zoning and Planning meeting, and again, we have more subdivisions going in again, planned for 65th Avenue, 69th. That area is getting platted and zoned, and I know that our staff is aware of that. I just want you all aware that we need to look 5 years out from now, because that's when the projected homes are going to be built. So it's all increasing in one particular area that I've noticed. Okay, I'm sure there are other areas too, but I sit on that board, and that's where the areas are that are growing right now.
Where is that again?
65th and all along 65th. all of that land is now proposed to be built,
Okay. All right,
all the way to US 1 from 58th.
okay. All right.
Is that, that's the, you're talking about the same thing that was in the paper last week, right?
Well, that was a
Is that a
different,
different one?
that's a different street, but 65th
it's-
is all being built up
It's
too.
all part.
All just north of Bent Pine and also north of, I think in golf courses.
Yeah, but,
North of Bent Pine and north of Hawks Nest. All of those, that land up there is all proposed to be built. It's single-family homes.
somebody who does not think in golf courses. But that's that same whole big development that's been being talked about.
Several developments.
There's a few, yeah. Anyway, the point being that we're looking at significant expansion over the next 5 years, which will affect our schools and our resources and our kids. and-
It'll affect our zoning for our elementary and middle school for sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Mrs. Rosario?
Yes, I went to a value adjustment board meeting yesterday. It was their organizational meeting for the 2019-2020 school year. And there wasn't anything significant to report other than voting on who was going to be, they were choosing a lawyer, a first, a second, and then a substitute, essentially, a magistrate, those kinds of things. And that's it. Nothing else to report.
I don't have anything else to report. I just want to say something I should have mentioned earlier and didn't when we passed the consent agenda. And again, I want to thank Dr. Moxley for her attention to personnel matters. We passed that very quickly, but there were some items on that agenda that had come to us as board members, that had come, I know, to Dr. Moxley. And I just really want to thank you for your close attention to personnel decisions as we move forward to being a stable and healthy district. So I just, there were a few things on that had come up in the past, and I just thank you for addressing those.
Mrs. Justice?
I have nothing.
Okay. I want to, at the last board meeting, I had talked with the board about wanting to host the interlocal government workshop to discuss health insurance, health care, the rising cost. And so the invitation will be going out today, and it will be on Tuesday, July 30th. Here in this room from 9 until 12:30 is what we have set up. And I will be also copying the board members on this invitation once we get it sent out. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the 4th of July parade. We are driving the Luna RV, and I believe the Moonshot Moment bus will be ahead of the Luna RV, and I look forward to seeing everyone out there for 4th of July, and I wish everyone a safe, happy holiday as we celebrate our freedom here in our country, and I appreciate all our staff and appreciate Liz coming up at last minute, and Mary Dee and Amanda for being here today, and just have a safe holidays. Let's see, Dr. Moxley?
I concur with Mrs. Zork's comments. Have a very safe, happy 4th of July, and thank you, staff, for being here today, and Ms. Cannon.
All right, with that, we're going to adjourn at 11:43.